July.
Welcome back to House Education, Wednesday, April 22nd. The committee is just going to get a quick walkthrough of a joint fiscal office fiscal note on S214, which is the act relating to the provision of pre-kindergarten in geographically isolated school districts. Well, in more like a geographically isolated school district. Anyway, Ezra, the floor is yours, and thanks for taking the time to walk through this.
Yeah, you're welcome. For the record, Ezra Holden, Joint Fiscal Office. As the chair said, this will be pretty brief. I've thrown it up on the screen just so we're all looking at the same thing here. So essentially, this bill would allow the NEK Choice School District to pay tuition to a public school in New Hampshire for eligible pre-K students within 25 miles of the Vermont border. So we estimate that this would increase education fund expenditures starting in fiscal year 2028. And the reason we say 2028 is because districts have already put together, and the majority of them have passed their budgets already for fiscal year 2027. So if this bill allowed more students to pay tuition to New Hampshire, the district would need to accommodate that within their existing budget because it's already been passed by the voters. So fiscal year 2028 is when you would see budgets potentially increasing to account for any additional students. So we estimate that this would allow up to 14 students to gain access to pre-K through this in New Hampshire. So that would be about $60,000 in increased education fund expenditures based on inflating the UPK tuition forward by 3%. And so in the education fund, that's considered de minimis because, $2.5 billion fund, 60,000 isn't really considered that large. However, any increase in expenditures does need to be covered. So there could be an adjustment to your homestead or non-homestead property tax rates to cover that. And it is a range because a parent has to decide to enroll their child in universal pre-K, and then they need to find a provider. So if no parent takes advantage of this, you could have zero increase. If several parents, several guardians, whatever, take advantage of this, find slots for their children, you could have up to 14 is our estimate. And that's where the 60,000 comes from.
I would point out to folks that the impact on the local school district would be relatively minor in that they would also be able to count these students in their student count, which they don't currently if they're not providing a pre-K voucher.
Yeah, that's a good point. And these students would bring some pre-K weights with them and potentially other weights that they qualify for if a student qualifies for economic disadvantage or English language learner, and then the district's able to get that information back from the school that their child is being tuitioned to. So yeah, that would play out at the local level if their tax rate would increase or not.
Are weights attached to pre-K students?
Yeah, pre-K students are eligible for weights. And we're talking about taxing capacity weights here, not the foundation formula. So they would be able to add those pre-K students, they being NEK Choice, to their weighted student count. And so that would be a 0.46 added to their weighted student count for each of those students, which they would use to offset the additional tuition costs of sending these kids to New Hampshire.
Right, but above and beyond the 0.46, I don't know if pre-K students also qualify for poverty English language learner weights.
So if the district receives the information back, they do qualify. And this would be a ledge council question about are schools required to send that information back to the sending district or not? And I believe that that's a piece within the big education transformation bill that was past, having that added in as a requirement. If you are tuitioning your students to a school, that school needs to ensure you're getting that information back. But that's outside of this bill.
Right. And basically the 60,000 is just 14 times the $4,100 tuition payment, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you had 7 kids, roughly 30,000. If you had 0 kids, roughly 0.
Yeah.
Actually 0. Actually 0.
Emily?
This really isn't for joint fiscal, I don't think. But I guess I will ask you first, are we taking any more testimony on this? Because even though this fiscal note really is, it's a de minimis cost. I read an article on the front page of a paper this morning talking about a closing of an elementary school on the border of Massachusetts. And parents making decisions to send their children to public schools in Massachusetts as well. And I guess I'm still considering setting precedent and how this could expand. I'm just gonna lay that on the table, because even though we're only talking 60,000 here in one school district, essentially, the Northeast Choice School District, and I totally understand why this is coming to us, but I'm always mindful of what we're opening the door to.
I think the difference is that the NEK Choice District has no schools within its area, whereas Reedsboro, if that's what you're talking about, has other schools within its SU, such as Wilmington, Stanford, Bristol State.
But there's a perspective that parents will get to send their kids to Massachusetts if they so choose.
Yeah.
And so I'm just bringing it up.
Yes.
And maybe this isn't for you either. The number 14, where did we get that number? Is that just what we know as far as enrollment in that area? Oh, sorry, enrollment in that area? You're using that number 14?
Yeah, so that's based on conversations I've had with officials from the NEK School Choice Board and also DCF when they went to the area. That was the rough estimate that they came back with. Roughly 7 3-year-olds and 7 4-year-olds. That's a rough estimate. Other people could come back with a different estimate and say, no, we actually have talked to this group of people and they tell us they don't have any kids. So it's all kind of has to be collected on the
A
ground.
little bit anecdotal. Yeah.
A little bit anecdotal.
It matches what I've heard from the sponsor, which was somewhere around 7. Might be
Okay, so
yeah.
it's not like we're right at 14 and then, if we get 15, it's gonna be, so
Yeah.
it might be more around 10.
Yeah.
Without room to flex.
This is a good-
Okay.
But if it was over, if someone ended up having triplets and surprise, that this would still work, right?
So this is just an estimate of a new expenditure on the education fund.
Yeah.
The education fund is self-leveling, so
Okay.
if everyone started having triplets and the number quadrupled or tripled or, this amount would go up, the education fund would automatically cover that
Okay.
by increasing homestead or non-homestead property tax rates. Yes, the education fund is self-leveling. So this is just an estimate in fiscal year 2028 of the new, I guess you would say burden, the new expenditure that is added to the ed fund that will then be covered by rates in that year. So yeah, if there were more kids who moved in or were born and were 3 or 4 and eligible for this number could increase.
And it should remind that pre-K is, I don't know if I call it an entitlement, but it is, in other words, if they're not going to New Hampshire, they can also send them to whatever town they might be working in or whatever. So.
Yeah, this is just to try to get an estimate at students who would be newly eligible, not exactly already going to a different program, and the parent decides to send them to New Hampshire instead. They're already within the pre-K system.
If I don't see any other questions, then we'll thank our witness and take a break until 10:45 then.
Just a general question.
Yes.
But I guess, I know that I'd mentioned it maybe the other day and then Rep. Long kind of mentioned something again, which brings me back to my question, which is, should we consider language that's a little broader to cover an instance where maybe in a year or two, there is no longer a pre-K program, or as a result of something that we do with the CSAs, maybe these things change and then there's an opportunity. So is it, within a 25-mile radius, if your district SD doesn't offer this particular program within 25 miles, then we have an agreement with Massachusetts, New Hampshire, or, say New York, Chittenden County. We don't have to worry about that problem. We probably never even have to think about it again, but down south.
So I think my response to that is that this was really carefully written and carefully tailored for a district that operates 0 schools. And I would say that to what might happen in the future, probably cross that bridge when we come to it. But for now, I think we would be opening a whole can of worms if we started broadening this. That might put the bill in jeopardy and might leave these people who literally have no schools in their district without an option. So just from a sort of procedural, pragmatic, let's get this problem solved. I would say if in the future more situations like this arise, then a similar bill can be introduced and passed as well. All right. Well, thank you. And we'll hold there. 10:45 back for